I want to keep talking about what it means. We've been going from Acts 2, what it means to be part of a church, and just perhaps re-clarifying what that means based on scripture rather than culture. Acts 2, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. And I kind of put these in these four togethers. This is what they were doing. They were learning together about Jesus and the way of Jesus. They were sharing together resources, time, energy, eating together, sharing and investing in relationships and worshiping together, rhythms to keep focused on Jesus. And it was their devotion to these four things that caused the church to be what it was, or it certainly seems to be from reading through Acts. And last week we started talking about this sense of what the Bible calls fellowship, the Greek's koinonia, which means this commitment to sharing your life, your time, so being together but more deeply your stuff, your resources, your energy, what that actually looks like from a Jesus perspective. And the key point is that the community that Jesus is building is a place where those who want to learn can become like him, a person consumed with love at the very deepest level. And the vision of life together that Jesus had with his disciples is quite different from what many of us hear when we hear about community or family or words like that. And so we're trying to kind of connect some of those mistakes. We went through last week just all these really different people that God called together, tax collectors and Jewish fishermen and zealots who were basically terrorists. And he basically gathered all these really different people together and went, okay, we're going to be together and you are going to learn together. And we kind of make some mistakes. So when we think about community, we mistake connection for community. We are more connected than ever through all our tech, but actually we're also more lonely than ever. And a lot of the studies show, in fact, many studies show, that the more you use social media and the internet, the more lonely you are. Because the internet is a place of disconnection, not connect. It's a place of false connection. So connectivity is up, but community is actually way down. And then we mistake chemistry for community. By chemistry, we mean that biological spark that we get when we have an instant connection with somebody who is like us. Chemistry is that thing that unites us around something, that we just go, you like that band, you like that sport, you're into lacrosse, woohoo! Like, oh, whatever it might be. That kind of connects us instantly in this place. C.S. Lewis said the root of all friendship is you too? You like that as well? That's the root of chemistry. But community is not about chemistry. Community is about a place where we have something in common. Of course, for us, we have somebody in common. We have Jesus in common. We have Holy Spirit in common. We have this wonderful book in common. We have all sorts of things in common. But I think what we've done is we've kind of looked at it and gone, well, that's not enough to gather around. So we've tried to find other places to gather around, other things to keep us together. And really what we're saying when we do that is that Jesus alone is not enough to bind us together. But he is enough to bind us together. That's what he showed with the disciples. Jesus alone was enough to bind together some very different people from very different backgrounds with very different thoughts on life, and he bound them together. So the biblical idea of community is that we have Jesus in common, and that's enough to bind us together. And as you follow through the early church, you see this in Acts. There's different cultures and languages and ethnicities added in. Despite all their differences, they have this thing in common, this person in common called Jesus. Which all sounds great, except the reality is a little bit harder, isn't it? The reality is a little bit harder. And this morning I want to talk about why we find it difficult at times. But I want to start with this, that it's really clear when you read the accounts of Jesus that he moves between two key spaces. He moves between being with people, living with people, walking with people, to the other extreme of up a mountain all night, completely on his own in silence and solitude. And then he goes back and he bees with people and he has parties and feasts and walks and talks to thousands and lives with thousands. And then he goes to Gethsemane on his own in the quiet and prays all night. He oscillates between these two places all the time. This is the pattern of life that he lives. He lives in community, then extracts himself back into his own place. And what's interesting about Jesus is when he goes into these places, he does it full on. When he's in community and with people, he's fully with people. This is a man who's going to live in a house. There is one room in these houses. There is no bedroom you're hiding. There is no a second lounge so you can get away from people when you're a bit fed up with them. There is just one room and one place where you are going to live and be. And of course, Jesus had people following him everywhere. He had to get on boats to escape people, and still, by the time he got there, they'd arrived anywhere. And then he goes, and when he goes into silence and solitude, he literally takes himself up a mountain where there is nobody and nothing. And he doesn't have an iPhone to listen to a podcast while he gets there, or to have some worship music on in the background. He just has him and Father on his own. So we could say this then. He goes, well, I've gone the wrong way, don't I? I moved that way. Anyways, so he goes fully into one and he goes fully into the other. And just like Samantha said, what's fascinating, and we'll get to this, is that these are the places you find healing. You find places of healing on your own, in intimacy with the Father, and you find places of healing in community with other people. And we're not going to focus on silence and solitude today. We're going to focus on community. But I think for us, we probably look a bit more like this. We know that we've got to engage, so we engage a little bit. And we understand that time alone with Jesus is really important, so we engage a little bit. And maybe for you, that arrow might kind of move to one side. Maybe you're a kind of extrovert, you're a people person, so you prefer more being with people than being on your own. Or maybe you're an introvert, so it moves this way. But for most of us, it's not the length of Jesus. It's this place where we enter some things a little bit, some things a little bit. Jesus goes to the extreme, but we find ourselves in these places. Why? Well, I think there's a few reasons, but one of the key reasons is that it is terrifying to be on your own in the silence for very long. Because then you have to listen to the thoughts in your head. And then you have to accept that they're your thoughts, and that can be utterly terrifying. It's also terrifying to be in community with people because they're not like you, and they don't see the world like you do, and they press all your buttons. So that's also terrifying. Which is why I think we live in this kind of in-between space where we don't really enter into either. We like having friends and spending time together, but to fully enter into the depths of community with a group, maybe with one person, we might be vulnerable and honest and open, and there's reasons for that, but maybe with a whole group, that is too much for us to go to. So we live in this middle place, never fully entering the place of silence and solitude, and never fully entering a place of community, primarily because we are scared, which we'll explore later. But his way of living, Jesus' way of living, showed us that he entered fully into times alone and fully into connection with people. And I want to share with you this morning 3 reasons why I think we don't do that. Our individualism, our idealism, and the intimidation of it. So first of all, individualism. We live in what the author David Brooks calls an age of hyper-individualization. Hyper-individualization. Meaning that everything of our Western culture is all about me. So I can go to McDonald's, I used to just have a cheeseburger. Now I can have a cheeseburger and decide that I don't want gherkin on it because I can individualize it down to the very thing that I exactly want. And if you think of all the other places you can now individualize everything, rather than just even paint. I don't just go and choose from a palette. Now I can get any color I want, and I can match it to any color I want, and it can be very individual to me. We live in this individualized place. But it also means we live in what we call a weak group culture. A weak group culture is where the individual is paramount. The individual is key. So when we make decisions, we generally think about what's best for us as an individual rather than any group we are a part of, which is quite unique to the Western world. Western Europe and North America. The rest of the world does not live in that place. If you talk to John and Kath about Cambodia, I would guess it'd be like a strong group culture where the needs of the many are more important. But for us, we live in, and we don't realize we live in this place because we live in it. And until you go to a different place, you don't understand it. But we live in this weak group culture where so just think about the last purchase you made and who you talked to about it. Think of how many people you involved in the decision about it. When you changed your car last, who did you think that should matter about? I'm guessing probably you and those closest to you. And maybe it might be like, well, we need a bigger one because we need to get the grandkids in now. But if you're in more strong group cultures, which is nearly all of Africa, nearly all of Asia, it would be like, what does the whole group need? It wouldn't be out of anybody's mind in a strong group culture to go, I need a car that can take a wheelchair because we've got Samantha. And that would be a normal thought, because the thought is about the group, not about the individual. Jesus lived in a strong group culture. What about when and where you go on holiday? We do it when it makes sense for us and when it works for us. In our diary and our time, and when we can get somebody to look after the dog and all the rest of it. But I don't think anybody's gone to a life group and gone, does this work for you guys if we go on holiday on these days? But that would be normal in a strong group culture, if they could even afford to go on holiday, which most of those cultures can't. But we live in this place. That's not to criticize it, it's just to show you it. It's just to let you become aware of it. We take all these decisions with very little regard, and I include me, I'm using we because I'm the same. All these decisions with very little regard for anyone outside of us, except perhaps our partner or closest confidants. We become so hyper-individualistic that committing to a group at the expense of what I want feels completely alien. Because we're not committed to a group, we're committed to me, myself, and I, and the very few people around me. That's what our culture tells us. This is why we find it so hard to commit and so easy to duck out. Because we live in a culture that screams at us daily, it's all about us, our happiness, our success, our fulfillment, but this is a million miles away from a biblical view of community. That culture is why the whole place we find ourselves with gender is completely normal now. It's because of this individual culture. Because as an individual, you can do whatever you want, however you want it, whatever that means. If we didn't have an individualized culture, you wouldn't have some of the things that are going on about gender right now. Because it wouldn't be about me, it would be about us. And there'd be something much bigger going on. But it is about us. The way to recalibrate that hyper-individualism is to commit to something that isn't solely about you. You have to do something to get out of it. Otherwise, you swim in this water the whole time, and it just will you'll be in it all the time. So the way to do it is to commit to something that isn't solely about you, to commit to something bigger, to a group of people who become more important than you and what you want. Which, of course, means dealing with the FOMO, the fear of missing out. Because once you've committed, okay, I'm going to go, I'm going to be here no matter what at this time, in this place, for these people, something better will come along next week, I can guarantee it. And your hyper-individualism goes, well, what's best for me? And Jesus goes, what's best for us? But we live in this place of this hyper-individualism. The commitment to being in a certain place with a certain group on a regular basis is an opportunity to surrender to the authority of Jesus, to give up your autonomy and your freedom to choose however you want. Because if you want to follow Jesus, you have to actually follow him wherever he leads, not just on the days and times and places he goes where you feel like going. If you want to follow Jesus, you have to actually follow him wherever he leads, not just on the days and times and places he goes where you feel like going. Now remember, all of this is not for the sake of it, but this is the way Jesus modeled for us to become like him. Someone who is consumed with love at the deepest level. This is who you are called to be and what's possible. But if we are going to become those people of love, we must understand the way to do that is to curb our alleged freedom to do whatever we want and make a conscious choice to do what is needful and helpful to shape us into people of love. Being part of a community is a discipline. Just like praying, reading the Bible, times of silence and solitude, fasting, whatever else. It's a discipline that is necessary to deal with the hyper-individualization of our culture. And because it's a discipline, that means it's hard work. But disciplines bring life. Disciplines bring life. Okay, number 2, idealism. One of the greatest enemies of us experiencing community is what we think it should be. We have these idealized versions of what it should be like. And because it then doesn't line up with these fantasies, we decide it's not worth it and not possible. And of course, it's in church. So instantly we set this higher bar than any other community and seem to assume that everybody else has already met the standards and it's just me that's learning. You remember I pulled up all these phrases from Romans last week. This is just in 4 chapters of the book of Romans. Be devoted to one another, honor one another, live in harmony, love one another, stop passing judgment, accept one another, instruct one another, greet one another. Listen, the New Testament writers assumed 2 things. 1, you were in community. 2, it was messy. Because you don't have to write all that if it's not messy. If it's all wonderful and they all get on very well, you don't have to write those things. If there are not people that you're in relationship with where there's not much harmony, you don't have to tell people to live in harmony. If there's not people who use their money differently, their time differently, they parent differently, they care for their elders differently, they see the world differently, you don't need to be told to stop passing judgment on them. The whole point of this thing is they are different because you are in a place of learning. As we said last week, it's good there are people you need to greet with a holy kiss, even though you'd like to greet them with a holy slap. Because listen, this is the whole point. It's actually the whole point. But of course we get so idealistic because we read those words and we think everybody should have them nailed down, especially if they've been in church for a little while. How many times you said that? Well, they should know better. Why? Why should they know better? Why? Do you know better? Have you got everything nailed down? Oh, they've been out longer than me. Okay. Well, when you've been out as long as them, we'll see if you're all the same, eh? No, listen. The whole point. We forget. Community is the place where this is worked out. There's all this instruction in the Bible because church, this group of people, this community, is a place where you are learning to love and be loved. Where you are learning to be a self-sacrificial, I can never say that, self-sacrificial servant who is consumed with love at the deepest level like Jesus. Because listen, community is the school of Jesus to teach you how to love and be loved. It is a school where you are learning. And we've got to stop thinking the church is a place where it gets lived out in perfection and start understanding community is the school. And the whole point of school is learning, and that in all learning, failing is part of it. Failing is part of learning. Is it not? Nobody goes to school and expects to get it right every time. You fail. That's how you learn. So guess what? When you're in community, it's the school where you fail and fail and fail and fail and fail together. And you learn together. You learn together. There'll always be failing because there's always learning. And failing is a sign that you are learning. It's not a sign that you've made a mess. It's a sign you are learning. And that's a wonderful thing. But listen, your idealistic view of what it should be like will not be realized because we will always be learning. And hopefully there'll always be new people who come in and will keep learning. But those people are also your teachers. They are also your teachers. Let's bin that ridiculous, idealized view and get enrolled in school and start learning along with everybody else. But of course, we don't really want to enroll because it's intimidating. Because it's scary. Because we don't want to go into solitude and community. We don't want to go into solitude, and we don't want to go into community, the two constants in Jesus' life, because they are places where our souls are laid bare, where we must confront our true selves, and when we enter the possibility of seeing our true selves, and even more scary, others seeing our true selves. Being alone with our thoughts in silence scares us, because we live most of our lives hiding from the reality and doing everything, we can to run away from them and drown them out. Because we have not learnt to have grace for ourselves, nor to live in the river of love and forgiveness that flows continually from the Father. So we hide from ourselves and from the deep sense of shame and fear that lives in the core of our being. We know what we are like. We know the thoughts that go through our heads. And we have believed a lie that because of those actions and thoughts, we are unloved and unlovable. This is why we can unite together, because we are all human beings. And it is the same for all of us. The incredible message of Jesus is that despite the reality of who we are, what we've experienced and what we've done, there is a place of acceptance and welcome in the arms of a Father who knows only love and compassion. But the great irony and challenge of the message of Jesus and the way of Jesus is that the very places that hold the greatest fear for us are also the places of healing and restoration. The very places that hold the greatest fear for us are also the places of healing and restoration. We long to belong. We long to feel safe. We long to feel accepted. We long to be able to be our true selves. But we also know that to experience belonging and safety and acceptance, we have to take the risk of being vulnerable, because without vulnerability, it's impossible to belong and feel safe and feel accepted. But vulnerability alone is not enough. Because if you want to be changed into a person of love, you need something in addition to vulnerability. You need accountability. The two most important elements to any true Jesus community are accountability and vulnerability. M. Scott Peck said, there can be no vulnerability without risk, but there can be no true community without vulnerability. And being vulnerable is always dangerous, because you might get hurt, rejected, criticized. But you might also experience acceptance and love and grace and healing and redemption and compassion. This is my favorite definition of community. Love-drenched accountability. Love-drenched accountability. Because we need both in equal measure if we want to become people of love. We need both. Remember, the community is the school of Jesus, to teach you how to love and be loved. And if we learn to be people of love, then the two ingredients are vulnerability and accountability. Vulnerability without accountability won't change anyone. We might share heart and we might be open, but basically that's just grace, grace, and more grace. And you'll never change. Even though you may well be accepted and it'll all be wonderful, because grace alone is not sufficient. But accountability without vulnerability won't change anyone either. Grace has to be present for us to change, and simply being called to a higher standard without grace won't make anyone change either, because truth alone is not sufficient. We need both. That's why things like AA work really well. It's why the results from any 12-step program meeting like AA work super well, because there is vulnerability and accountability. Hi, I'm Adam. I'm an alcoholic. I'm not, by the way. But it's just an example. At least, not yet. I got there first. There's vulnerability. And then there's the, hey, I've gone 7 weeks, and then this happened, and I drank again. And there's the accountability of, I'm going to come every week, and I'm going to share where I'm at, and we're going to celebrate our success, and we're going to be with you in your failure. That's why those things work really well. And you realize it all came from the church. It uses the phrase higher power. It's really all about God. It's an incredible program that has worked all around the world. I heard one commentator say it's fascinating that in the church on a Sunday morning, there will be less change and less transformation of the people than on a Tuesday night around rubbish coffee in the 12-step meeting. Because accountability and vulnerability live in the AA meeting. They don't perhaps live as much in the church. They do in ours, but there's more to go. Of course, there's a risk. There's a risk of walking in true community, a risk of vulnerability. And listen, our hyper-individualization has also led to the false belief that as long as we've shared with just one person, that's okay. Because there's such a rise now, and none of this is bad, but there's such a rise of counsellors and therapists and all that sort of stuff that we've believed the lie that it's all one-on-one. And just one-on-one works. Listen, that's all fantastic, and for many people it's absolutely vital. But actually, it's not the model Jesus had. Jesus had 12. Show me a moment where he has an individual conversation with his disciples. I don't think Jesus went, right, Peter, your turn for your one-on-one now. I mean, read it. They're all there, all the time. Now, of course, it's a strong group culture and all that, and they're used to it and all that. But we've gone so far the other way that as long as we've shared it with one person, that's it. No, just share it now. Well, I don't think that's biblical. I don't think it's Jesus' model. I think there's something bigger and greater that's about sharing around a group. That's about sharing with multiple people. And of course, that's another risk, because for us, and because of our hyper-individualized culture, just saying it to one person seems terrifying. So the thought you could share it to 3 or 4, that's a big risk. Yeah, big risk. Big benefit. We've got to be careful. It's interesting that if you look at the life of Jesus, you found that much of his life of worship was done one-on-one, and his life of discipleship was done in groups. We've inverted it. Worship's in group and discipleship's one-on-one. But Jesus, it was the other way around. His worship was, I'm off to the mountain to be with Father, and I'm just going to be on my own. And then he did discipleship in these big groups. Took 12 people, 3 people, hundreds of people, 120 people, and taught to them all the time. Calls out Peter in front of 12 other people and says, get behind me, Most of us will struggle if it were one-on-one, never mind. But what will those other 11 people think? I don't know. Maybe that's part of their discipleship. Maybe you're going to teach them. Maybe that's part of their learning, as is your learning to understand you are loved in that place. You see, no, let's not go there. Listen, there is a risk of walking and committing to true community. There's a risk you might miss out. There's a risk, blah, 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 blah. Okay, there's also a certainty if you don't. There's a risk if you do and a certainty if you don't. Because choosing not to place ourselves in community, in places of vulnerability and accountability, means we can be certain we will not grow as people of love. You know, there's all these safe spaces now, isn't there? Church isn't meant to be a safe space. In this regard, is it meant to be loving, caring, gracious? Yes. But these days, a safe space is a place where my buttons don't get pressed and you don't offend me. And you can't rub me up the wrong way and you can't say anything that I disagree with. Okay, that is not a church. A safe space, church, is a space where you can share and be met with grace and love and compassion, but you can also be challenged and you can also be provoked and you can also be held accountable. That's the safe space of a church. But the question I want to leave you this morning is this. Do you want to grow as a person of love? Do you want to become more like Jesus, who is consumed with love at the deepest level? And if the answer is yes, then you have no choice but to enroll in the school of community, because that is the place where you learn to love and be loved. And by choosing to be in that place, whom you may have little chemistry with, but who you choose to be with week after week after week, you learn to love and be loved. You learn to love and be loved. You don't learn to love sat at home. You don't really learn to love sat at working every hour there is. You learn to love when you choose to continually and constantly put yourself in a community, in a group of people, and commit to being in that group. And of course, we know all the reasons, don't we? Oh, if I go tonight, they'll be saying, I just know so-and-so is going to tell that tale for the 5th time. I've heard it 5 times now. I don't want to hear it again. Okay. It's a school. And yes, they need to learn, but so do you. Because you have clearly not learned grace yet. You've clearly not learned patience yet. You've clearly not learned kindness yet. Of course, they need to learn as well. But all the time we go, well, I'll go when they learn. If they shut up and they don't pray as long and they stop telling me that story, then I'll turn up. No, you don't get to choose who you go to school with. Did you get to choose who you went to school with? Do you get to choose who's in your class? No. Okay. But you learn. The question is not whether you want to be in community. It's not whether you want to be in the nicest class or not. It's, do I want to learn a bit like Jesus? And if you do want to learn, you'll put yourself in the most difficult class. Because then you'll learn quickest and most and fastest. If you don't want to learn, you'll put yourself in the easiest class. Well, that's up to you. But I want to encourage you to make the choice to enroll further and deeper in the wonderful school of community. Because then you will have an incredible opportunity to learn to become a person of love like Jesus. Amen?